If your company is struggling to stay on plan, you're going to have to quickly make some tough decisions. One of the first and most consequential is whether you bring in outside leadership or take the time to grow your own. Increasingly, companies are making the decision to bring in fractional executives at key decision points to fill in the gap and stay on plan. If this is where you find yourself, we've got just the expert to talk to about growing, struggling businesses. Michael Pacheco, fractional CMO and customer centric leader. Michael, welcome to the Subscription Maker Impact.
Zachary, thank you. I appreciate you making time for me and inviting me on.
Let's do some level setting. What is a CMO or Chief Marketing Officer as opposed to a CCO or Chief Communications Officer?
That is a good question. CMO, I think, is a bit more broad. CMO is gonna focus on an overall marketing strategy and execution of that. They're going to act as executive leadership for the marketing team. They're going to be working more closely with the sales team as well. Whereas a chief communications officer is going to be more focused on things like corporate communications, public relations, things like that. That
Yeah, this is a question. Do you see do you see companies moving in and starting to bring in more CCOs?
Not at the level at which I play. No.
Okay. Now, if you would you talk about why customers bring you in? What is it that you bring to the table, you and other CMOs? What is it that you guys bring to the table that helps customers get out of the funk that they find themselves?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that it's not necessarily right. A company is not necessarily going to bring in a fractional CMO to fix a problem. So it's not necessarily that they're in a funk and then they would bring in a fractional CMO. Sometimes it's simply that they've reached a level of success. Perhaps they've plateaued somewhat, and they've discovered that, like with anything, it's a good idea to hire a professional to handle specific things. For example, right, dentistry. You can brush your teeth and floss your teeth at home, but if you need a crown or if you need a cavity filled, you're probably gonna hire a dentist to do that for you. So that's kind of what I see there is again, when a company gets to a certain level, maybe the CEO or someone else in the company has been managing marketing strategy, managing marketing team, managing contractors, managing an agency up to that point, and it gets to a level where it becomes too much, then they'll bring in someone fractional. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, it's more of a way of divide and conquer. So
Sure.
someone's been wearing multiple hats, and all of a sudden they get some success. Things are starting to really cook, and now they need to bring in some help. It sometimes takes a year, just to find someone like a good CMO to bring on full time. Then it takes them another 6 months to get up to speed.
Mhm.
So why not bring on someone who can hit the ground running?
Yeah. I think with fractionals, I mean, it's a different game entirely, right? If your company is doing over, let's say 50 million annually, you might be ready for a full-time CMO, right? The scope of work is going to be larger. There's just a lot more moving parts. If you're doing under that, I think it can make a lot of sense for a company to bring in someone fractional, and not just CMO, right? But a fractional executive leadership in multiple departments. But to answer to respond to what you were saying about kind of landing, starting off running. I'm butchering what you said, but you get the idea, right? I think fractionals are able to be more agile. They're almost required to be, because you're as a fractional, you're working with multiple companies. So I know for me at least, I've built systems around speedy onboarding, what strategy generation looks like, things like that. So I am, compared to a CMO, for example, at a Fortune 500, I'm able to come into a company that's new, come into a new company, and look at what their business objectives are, create a leveraged strategy around that, something that bridges that gap between where the company's at now and their business goals, and kind of essentially get things moving within the first month usually.
Okay, now you're talking my language.
Yeah.
So you're what I hear you saying is I hear process, I hear systems. When I hear that, I have to ask you, talk to us a bit about your process. How does that work? How do you work with company? How do you prepare them to get the ball rolling?
So yeah, I mean, what I do is pretty straightforward, and I'll give you the short and sweet version of it. But essentially, when I come into a new company, I want to embed myself in the company. A fractional CMO is an employee, they're not a contractor. It's an employee of the company, and I take that role very seriously. I'm working in the best interest of the company, not in the best interest of myself or in the best interest of my agency or anybody else. I'm an employee of that company. And I think so. What I do when I come into a company is, first thing I want to do is look at what they have done, what has worked and what has not worked. I want to understand the business goals. That's the most important thing. Um, and then I will consider what marketing channels we can use to bridge the gap. Like I mentioned this before, to bridge the gap from where the company is at today and then get over to those business goals. Marketing for the sake of marketing is a ridiculous waste of time. A lot of people do it. A lot of marketers will they'll try 10 different things at once. Facebook ads, content marketing, social media marketing. Let's do everything. Let's throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and see what works. That's a great way to spend a whole bunch of money and not get traction. What every CMO should be doing is understanding business goals and considering what channels are the most leveraged to reach that business goal. Start with one or two channels and get those working. Get it to a point where you're spending $1 and you're bringing back $2, and the marketing team can then pay for their own initiatives from then on, because it turns that marketing department from a cost center into a profit center.
Now I want to touch on something you just talked about. Do you have your own agency?
I do have my own agency. Yeah.
Okay, so what's that like? I mean, I talk to a lot of people. When you talk to fractional executives, or you talk about fractional executives, it almost sounds like you're talking about people who got one foot in the grave. They're rolling out of a company after 40, 50 years, and now they're a fractional. They hit the marketplace, they put out their shingle, and they're a fractional. But the people I've been able to get on my podcast, the people that I've been able who shown the most interest in what I'm talking about, have been people like yourself, who have agencies, who have businesses of their own, and the fractional part is a premium service. Does that make sense to you?
It does completely. That is, so for me, I can't speak for anyone else. My agency is completely 100% siloed from Michael Pacheco, the fractional CMO. 100% siloed. I don't have a fractional client that uses my agency. Obviously, it's a conflict of interest. I take those kind of integrity and ethics issues very, very seriously. If I do see a good fit for a company that I'm working for as a fractional CMO and my agency, um, I have hired out to my agency in the past, but it has to be a good fit, right? Once again, as a fractional CMO, I'm an employee of that company, and I'm acting in the best interest of the company, not in the best interest of anyone else. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. I apologize because we've kind of entered into that existential zone, where,
Oh,
you know,
good
I,
man. No,
we're,
I love it. I love it.
yeah,
I
you
love these
know,
conversations. Integrity is huge for me.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, back in the day, there was Calvin and Hobbes, and every once in a while, Calvin or Hobbes would say something and they would kind of float around in an existential bubble. That's where we're at. So I just wanted to let you know that's where we're at. We're talking about, where we go with this, because I see a fractional, I see that really as the future of expertise. You're going to grow your expertise, and then there comes a point where fractional becomes the next step, where you have to go there. If you're going to be a CEO, you're going to be a CMO. I think that there's going to come a point where you're going to want that fractional just to level up. In product marketing, what they say is that it's best to have people work on multiple projects, that the concurrently, that the act of working on multiple projects allows you to get multiple feedback, multiple streams of feedback, and that allows you to grow and to get better and level up. What do you think about that?
well, there's a lot of good stuff to unpack there. First of all, I want to thank you for bringing up Calvin and Hobbes. I'm a huge Bill Watterson fan. The Lazy Sunday book is one of the greatest books ever written. Um, and then in terms of fractional CMOs working on multiple projects, I think you're spot on with that. I think that there's a lot of I think when you're even in your personal life, right? You should be active in doing stuff. You should always have hobbies. You should be reading fiction. You should be reading history and biographies. There's so much opportunity for intersection in professional and personal, and within professional and professional and within personal and personal and professional and personal, and back and forth and back and forth. I think of one of my favorite uh, one of my favorite creatives of all time, Joss Whedon, the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He took the cheesy teen drama and intersected it with vampires and created one of the greatest cult shows in history. Um, and I think marketing, more so than a lot of other departments, is a lot. It's a lot about creativity and creative work, and the opportunity for those unexpected, unanticipated intersections is so great, and becomes greater if you're not wearing blinders and only working and hyper focused on one single project. And I think that's definitely I think that's one of the great advantages of a fractional CMO, that they're able to come into a company with a fresh set of eyes, a fresh pair of ears, and a fresh brain, and approach these problems that seem like old guard to people already in the company, but they're able to approach it from a completely idiosyncratic point of view, because because that fractional CMO is not part of the old guard within the company. They haven't been working there for a very long time. And that's, it's just a pretty cool thing, because you can shake things up a little bit, and if you have leadership skills, you can do it with grace and with style, and with everybody excited to be working on those projects.
So one of the ways I like to think about shaking things up is going into impact and talking about the difference between impact and value. And when I think of value, I think of basically ROI. If I'm delivering value, I'm delivering ROI. I have to be able to show you what you're going to get back. It's transactional. I
Mm-hmm.
do this, and then it comes back to me. But then when I think of impact, I think more of like demand generation, where I'm going to go higher in the stream. I'm going to go upstream. I'm going to talk to people before they're even in the buying process. I'm going to get them ready to let them know that once you enter this process, I know you're coming, but once you enter this process, I'm the guy you should talk to. What do you think?
Yeah, impact is a that's a big word, and it's kind of a buzzword, right, in the last 10, 20 years. Um, I mean, I think it can mean a lot of things, man. I think there's going back to Calvin and Hobbes. There's existential impact, right? There's the idea of working on something bigger than yourself, working on something that not only does good things for people but does good things for humanity. I mean, there's that aspect of impact, and I love working on projects where people are doing big scary things. It's just more fun. Just it's way more fun. And then there's another. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was thinking more like if you put on your agency hat, you
Yeah.
say, okay, how can my agency have more impact? And when I see that happening, I start to hear people talk about productized services and subscriptions, and basically going in there and saying, okay, this is where you want to go. Now, it may take more than one service to get you there. You've got something you're trying to accomplish, something open ended. Because a lot of times it comes down to framing. You can frame something and it can only have one answer.
Hmm.
But then if you open up the framing, you can frame it in a way where it has multiple answers. And basically, we look at which one will create the most impact. Does that make sense?
No, and that's exactly what I was trying to do with the word impact, right? Open up that frame, and like there's multiple ways to approach that word, but to respond to it from that point of view, for me, I'm always gonna go back to business goals, marketing for the sake of marketing, or productizing for the sake of productizing to have more products. None of it really means anything if you're not achieving business goals. So what? Look at Talk to the CEO, look at the CEO, powwow with the CEO, figure out what those big business goals are. Where is the company headed in the next 6 to 18 months? Where is the company headed in the next 5 to 10 years? What are their business goals, and how can marketing help to bridge that gap from where you are now to whatever that business goal is? Sometimes, and not even marketing, right, but it's the whole revenue engine, which marketing is a part of, but it's also customer service, customer experience. It's sales is a big part of that, right? The handoff of a customer or a client from marketing and demand generation to the sales process, then to the product or service, and then to customer service when something goes wrong. Is that smooth? Is the customer happy and having a good experience the entire time? Do they, when they use your product, are they like, God damn, this is so cool, this is such a great product, I love these people? Whenever I have a problem, their customer service is so good. That's impactful.
Now, do you see a gap analysis that happens between, this is where we want to take the company, but this is where the customer is. And is the customer ready to make that leap with us? And how do we get that customer ready to make the leap to where we know we need to be? Because customers can't define your company. You know what you need to do to make your company successful based on the economics, based on the people you have, and the overhead you have. You know the kinds of things you need to do in order to service and make your company successful. But then the customer may not be in that place yet. How do you get them there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's, the customer's a piece of that puzzle, right? There's the market and the customer. There's your product or service. Um, and then there's the channels and the methods and the tools that you have at your disposal to help guide the customer through that customer journey. Um, to answer your question, or rather to not answer your question, how do you get them there? I think it depends on so much, right? There's so many variables there. There's a lot of variables, and the customer is just one piece of that puzzle.
Okay, so I'm going to go more existential on you. So, did you always want to be an entrepreneur?
Um, I'll tell you what I didn't. I'll tell you what I didn't want. I did not want to be told what to do. Um, yeah, I never took to authority very well. I was a well-behaved kid, and I didn't like school. I didn't do particularly well in school. I didn't like being told what to do, or how to behave or things like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I always had entrepreneurial leanings. I think I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I discovered that guppies, the fish, they if you put them into a tropical fish tank, they bred like crazy. So I started my first business. I was 8 or 9 years old, and I started a company called Great Guppies, where I went to the fish store, got a bunch of guppies, threw them into a little tropical fish tank, and let them breed like crazy. And then I went door to door around my neighborhood trying to sell guppies. It didn't the market wasn't there for it, as you might imagine, but um, it was a fun summer project.
It was a learning experience.
Yeah, exactly. I learned a lot about market demand right there.
Yeah, so I guess I mean you're the perfect entrepreneur, I would think, because a lot of entrepreneurs are unemployable. They are not great employees.
Yeah.
They're the kind of people that have to find their own way and make something work out of nothing. So having said that,
Mhm.
what advice would you give young entrepreneurs who want to pursue a career similar to yours?
Yeah. Man, be prepared, at least initially. The entrepreneur is the guy or gal that'll give up a 40-hour a week high paying job to risk, initially low paying or no paying, and work, 80 hours a week. So be prepared to struggle, be prepared to screw up a lot. Be prepared to do a lot of introspection and think about your behavior and how you handle situations, how you handle failure, um, and be curious. That's probably the biggest one I would say, is always be curious.
Okay, Michael. On this podcast, we like to talk about podcasters as fire givers and their guests as catalysts that fan the flames. So, as a catalyst and guest fire giver, what are you most passionate about? And what tools would you hand down to the next generation to advance that passion?
Um, Man, I think that in this stage of my life, I am. Ah, that's a good question. Um, for me right now, if I'm being totally honest, I got to go with family. I'm 44 years old. I've got a 2-year old baby girl, and I've got a 6-month-old baby girl. I've got two daughters, and you know, working, being able to work from home, in this is my home office, and look after those two and see them every day throughout the day and watch them grow up and be a part of that is worth so much more than anything else, for me. And I think if I was, if this was 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, I would be, getting into my car and driving to work and working long hours at an office and coming home late. And I would miss all of that. And I just can't even imagine. Not sure if that answers your question, but
It does. Absolutely. Just wanted to get the camera set up right. So, as we start to wrap up,
yeah.
Michael, is there anything you wish more people would ask you?
Oh, let's see. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people, specifically if I'm going to circle back to marketing. A lot of people want to know, how to do X, Y, or Z. And a lot of people get very interested in tips and tricks and tactics. And I think that's the wrong approach. I think the better approach is to seek out people that you respect, seek out people that are doing what you want to do and that are doing it very well and very successfully, and ask them about their thought process, because that if learning the thought process is going to get you so much further than learning the tactic that is popular this week that will change next week. But if you can learn the thought process, you can model that thought process in your own work and in your own life, and that's going to impact your own life. We talked about impact before. I think that's going to impact your own life personally and professionally, in such a greater way than anything tactical could ever hope to.
So, what's the best way to follow you on social media?
Yeah. I'm probably most active right now on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in/the Michael Pacheco. It's at the Michael Pacheco, pretty much everywhere except for Twitter. And at Twitter, I'm Michael Pacheco X.
Michael, thank you for joining us on the Subscription Maker podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
As we start to wrap up, more people work way too hard and earn too little from their online businesses. You don't have to be one of them. And that's a wrap.